Welcome to True God Code. Glad you're here. Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what's next. From an ancient scroll, a priest in exile recorded what he saw. His words survived centuries, preserved for a generation that would be tested. This channel documents the mathematical, astronomical, and historical case that one book was authored from outside time. Everything we present is sourced and verifiable. Don't trust us. Check us. Today's film is the most urgent work we've produced. You will see a battle described 26 centuries ago, named nations, specified conditions, and a coalition assembling now exactly as written. You will see a mathematical deadline most have missed, a hard cutoff embedded in the text that makes this the only window the mathematics allows. And you will see the public record, government statements, military assessments, and news archives documenting every required element. This is not interpretation dressed as evidence. This is evidence that forces a conclusion. Like, share, and subscribe to True God Code. What follows takes about 30 minutes, and it may change how you read headlines for the rest of your life. The Prophet and the Vision. Ezekiel was a priest. He was not a general, not a politician, not a geopolitical analyst. He was a Jewish exile living in Babylon in the 6th century before Christ, writing under conditions of national catastrophe. His people had been conquered, their temple destroyed, their king removed, their identity as a nation suspended. He had no access to intelligence reports about distant nations. He had no maps of future political configurations. He had no mechanism for knowing what the world would look like 2.5 millennia after his death. And yet in chapters 38 and 39 of the book that bears his name, Ezekiel described a specific military coalition, a specific target, a specific set of conditions that would exist when the attack occurred, a specific divine response, and a specific aftermath so detailed that it includes the number of years it takes to clean up. The precision is not vague. It is not the kind of broad, symbolic language that can be fitted to almost any historical event after the fact. It is operational, geographical, and temporally specific, and the conditions it describes have never been met in the historical record until now. The vision begins in chapter 38, verse 2. Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. A leader, a land, a coalition, an attack. Ezekiel is told to speak directly against a specific figure and the alliance he commands. Before we identify the nations, we need to establish the conditions, because the conditions Ezekiel describes for when this battle occurs are themselves precise enough to function as a checklist, and every item on that checklist has a current real-world status that can be verified independently. The conditions that must exist. Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 8 through 12 specify the conditions under which the attack occurs. These are not vague generalities. They are specific observable conditions that Ezekiel says will characterize Israel at the moment of the invasion. The first condition is verse 8. In the latter years thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste. But it is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely all of them. A land brought back from the sword, gathered out of many people, a nation that had been waste, uninhabited, desolate, restored and repopulated. This is a specific historical description. For 1900 years after the Roman destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the land of Israel was not a sovereign Jewish state. It was a province of successive empires, Byzantine, Arab, Crusader, Mamluk, Ottoman, British. The Jewish population was dispersed across the world. The land was, in the words of multiple 19th century travelers, including Mark Twain, who visited in 1867, largely desolate, a landscape of empty hills and malarial swamps with a sparse and declining population. On May 14, 1948, the State of Israel declared independence. The nation that Rome had attempted to erase by renaming a province came back into existence after 1900 years. The people gathered from many nations, from Europe, from North Africa, from Yemen, from Ethiopia, from the Soviet Union, from Argentina, returned to the mountains of Israel. The waste places were rebuilt. The condition of verse 8 was met on a specific date that the mathematical framework of the True God Code predicted within 2 days, documented in detail on this channel. The second condition is verses 11 and 12. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil and to take a prey. Israel dwelling in a condition of relative security. Not perfect security. The text does not say no enemies exist. It says Israel is dwelling without walls, at rest, in a condition that the attacking coalition perceives as an opportunity. This condition describes modern Israel precisely, a technologically sophisticated nation living without the ancient fortification systems of walled cities, confident in its military capability and its alliance relationships, prosperous enough to be worth attacking for spoil and prey. The attacker's motivation is explicitly economic and territorial, not purely ideological. The third condition, embedded in the broader Ezekiel 38 context, is that Israel must be sufficiently sovereign and sufficiently stable for these conditions to be observable. A people in exile scattered among the nations do not dwell safely in unwalled villages in the mountains of Israel. The conditions of Ezekiel 38 require a reconstituted Israeli state, which did not exist from 70 AD until 1948, and which means this prophecy could not have been fulfilled at any point in the 1900 years between those dates. We are the first generation in 19 centuries for whom the conditions of Ezekiel 38 are met. Ezekiel names a coalition by ancient names. He points to a leader and a direction of attack. Gog is the leader. Magog is his land, set to the north of Israel. Ancient sources align Magog with the Eurasian steppe. Josephus links Magog to the Scythians, and Ezekiel repeats the geography. You come from the far north. Persia is not in dispute. Persia is modern Iran. Kush refers to the lands south of Egypt, modern Sudan and adjacent regions. Put is west of Egypt, modern Libya. Gomer and Togarmah point to Anatolia and the Caucasus, the sphere of modern Turkey and its near neighbors. In modern terms, Russia leading with Iran, Turkey, Libya and Sudan, joined by peoples from the Caucasus and Central Asia. That is the coalition Ezekiel recorded, identified by ancient names and aligned due north of Israel. The current geopolitical record, every claim sourced and verifiable. This is where the documentary moves from ancient text to public record. Every claim in this section is sourced from publicly available documents, news archives, government statements, and verified reporting. Nothing here requires you to trust this channel. It requires you to search the sources. Russia and Iran have maintained a strategic partnership that has deepened significantly since 2015. The Russian military intervention in Syria, which began in September 2015, placed Russian forces in direct operational cooperation with Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps units for the first time in modern history. The two nations coordinated air and ground operations, shared intelligence, and established joint command structures in the Syrian theater. This is documented in reporting from Reuters, the Associated Press, and the Institute for the Study of War, all of which covered the Syrian intervention in detail throughout 2015 to 2019. The relationship deepened further with the Ukraine war beginning in February 2022. Iran became a primary weapons supplier to Russia, providing Shahed series kamikaze drones that Russian forces deployed extensively against Ukrainian infrastructure. This is documented in statements from the United States Department of Defense, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, and Ukrainian government officials, all of which publicly identified Iranian drone technology in recovered debris from Russian strikes. The Wall Street Journal the New York Times, and Reuters all reported on the Iran-Russia drone supply relationship with sourced documentation. Turkey's relationship with the Ezekiel coalition is more complex and more revealing. Turkey is a NATO member with formal alliance commitments to the Western defense structure, and yet Turkey has simultaneously maintained its relationship with Russia through the purchase of the S-400 missile defense system, a Russian weapons platform that NATO explicitly warned was incompatible with alliance systems, and has mediated between Russia and Ukraine throughout the conflict. Rather than fully aligning with the NATO position, Turkey has also maintained economic relationships with Iran despite Western sanctions pressure. The drift of Turkey away from full Western alignment and toward the Eurasian configuration that Ezekiel describes is documented across a decade of reporting from every major international news organization. Libya's current status places it squarely in the coalition geography. The Libyan civil war that began following the 2011 NATO intervention produced a fractured state with competing governments and no unified sovereign authority. Russia intervened on behalf of the Libyan National Army under Khalifa Haftar, deploying Wagner Group mercenary forces that were documented by the United Nations panel of experts on Libya in multiple reports between 2019 and 2023. Russian military presence in Libya, specifically at the Yufra and Al-Watiya air bases, gives Russia forward positioning in the territory Ezekiel identifies as part of the coalition. This is documented in UN reports that are publicly available on the United Nations website. Sudan and the broader Kush territory have similarly experienced Russian penetration. The Wagner Group established significant operations in Sudan, the Central African Republic, Mali, and other sub-Saharan African nations during the same period, documented by the Africa Center for Strategic Studies, the Council on Foreign Relations, and extensive investigative reporting by the BBC and Reuters. The coalition Ezekiel described 26 centuries ago, Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, Sudan, is the coalition that public records document assembling in real time, in the exact geographical configuration the text specifies, during the exact window the mathematics requires. The opposition and the absent allies. One of the most telling confirmations that Ezekiel's coalition description is accurate to the current moment is not only who he says will attack, but who he says will not. Ezekiel 38 verse 13, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey? Sheba and Dedan are ancient names for the Arabian Peninsula, the territory of modern Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. They do not join the attack. They stand on the sidelines and issue a diplomatic protest, Art thou come to take a spoil? Which is the language of formal objection without military intervention. This is a precise description of the current Abraham Accords alignment. The normalization agreements signed between Israel and the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan and Morocco in 2020, and the ongoing Saudi normalization discussions that were interrupted by the Gaza war of October 2023 represent exactly the configuration Ezekiel describes. Arab states of the Gulf Peninsula moving toward formal alignment with Israel, separate from and opposed to the Russia-Iran-Turkey coalition. The Gulf states have every economic reason to object to a Russian and Iranian military operation that would destabilize the region they depend on for their own security. They have no appetite for joining the attack. Ezekiel's description of Sheba and Dedan as observers issuing protests rather than participants in the coalition maps precisely onto the current geopolitical posture of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. The merchants of Tarshish with all the young lions thereof is the most debated identification in the chapter. Tarshish, in ancient usage, referred to a distant Western trading partner. Most scholars identify it with the Iberian Peninsula or the broader Western Mediterranean. The young lions are generally understood as the commercial and political offspring of that Western trading tradition, the nations that emerged from Western European civilization. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the broader Western Alliance are the young lions of the Western European tradition in the modern era. Their response in Ezekiel 38 verse 13 is identical to the Gulf states, a diplomatic protest, not a military intervention. This is a specific and uncomfortable observation for Western readers. Ezekiel does not describe the United States or the NATO alliance riding to Israel's defense when the Gog-Magog coalition attacks. He describes them issuing a formal objection from the sidelines. The divine response to the attack is not a Western military coalition. It is direct divine intervention. Earthquake, plague, hailstones, fire, and brimstone falling on the attacking forces on the mountains of Israel. Whether the absence of Western military intervention reflects a prior weakening of the Western alliance, a political decision not to commit forces, or a situation in which events move too quickly for Western response, the text does not specify. What it specifies is the outcome. The attacking coalition is destroyed on the mountains of Israel not by a human opposing force, but by a divine response that leaves 1/6 of the attacking army alive, according to chapter 39 verse 2. The divine response, how God answers the coalition's assault. Ezekiel chapter 38 verses 19 through 22 is the description of how God responds to the Gog-Magog attack, and it deserves careful reading because it is one of the most dramatic passages in the entire prophetic corpus. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea and the fowls of the heaven and the beasts of the field, and all creeping things that creep upon the earth, and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence. And the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. And I will call for a sword against him throughout all my mountains, saith the Lord God. Every man's sword shall be against his brother. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him, and upon his bands, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire and brimstone, an earthquake of sufficient magnitude to be felt globally, the attacking forces turning on each other in the confusion, pestilence and blood, torrential rain, hailstones, fire and brimstone falling on the attacking coalition on the mountains of Israel. The scale of the destruction is confirmed in chapter 39, verses 3 through 5. And I will smite thy bow out of thy left hand, and will cause thine arrows to fall out of thy right hand. Thou shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel, thou and all thy bands, and the people that is with thee. I will give thee unto the ravenous birds of every sort, and to the beasts of the field to be devoured. Thou shalt fall upon the open field, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. The attacking force does not retreat. It does not withdraw in defeat. It falls on the mountains of Israel and is consumed. The scale of the destruction is so total that chapter 39 verses 9 through 16 describe an extended cleanup operation. 7 years of burning weapons and 7 months of burying the dead. The deadline, how the math fixes the window, let's calculate the cutoff together. And it is in verse 9 that the mathematical deadline is embedded. Ezekiel chapter 39 verse 9. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth, and shall set on fire and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, and the handstaves and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years. 7 years. The people of Israel, dwelling in their cities, sovereign and present in the land, burn the weapons of the defeated coalition for 7 years. This is not symbolic. The text is describing a practical disposal operation for the material left behind by a destroyed military force. 7 years of burning. Now go to Matthew chapter 24 verse 16. Jesus is describing the midpoint of the 70th week, the moment 3.5 years into Daniel's final 7-year period when the abomination of desolation is set up. His instruction to the people of Judea is immediate and unambiguous. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Do not go back. Do not return for possessions. Flee immediately. Revelation chapter 12 verse 6 confirms the duration. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days, 1,260 days, 3.5 years. The people of Israel are in flight, sheltered in the wilderness, absent from their cities. You cannot burn weapons in your cities if you have fled your cities. The 7-year burning window of Ezekiel 39 verse 9 requires Israel to be present, stable, and sovereign throughout the entire burning period. A people in flight, sheltered in the wilderness for 1,260 days, cannot be maintaining a weapon disposal operation at home. This means the Gog-Magog battle cannot begin during the 70th week. The battle must be fought, won, and the weapons disposal operation must begin before the 70th week opens. The 7-year burning period must be complete or nearly complete by the time the tribulation begins, because the tribulation sends Israel into the wilderness for 3.5 of those 7 years. The 70th week, according to the True God Code framework documented across this channel, opens on April 14, 2033. This is the date confirmed by the Daniel calculation, the NASA Eclipse database, the Feast Day Tetrad sequence, the Hosea clock, the Sabbath framework, and the fig tree generation. 7 independent streams of evidence converging on the same date from 7 different directions, all verifiable independently of this channel. If the 70th week opens on April 14, 2033, and the Gog-Magog battle must conclude before that date, and the battle must precede the 7-year weapon disposal, then Gog-Magog has a hard deadline. The battle must occur, and Israel must begin burning weapons before April of 2033. Working backward from that date, the battle cannot begin later than approximately 2026 to provide a reasonable burning window before the tribulation begins. The mandatory window for Gog-Magog is the window we are currently living through. This is not a prophetic suggestion. It is a mathematical conclusion from 2 fixed data points: the 7-year weapon disposal of Ezekiel 39 and the opening of the 70th week in 2033. The arithmetic does not leave room for Gog-Magog to occur after 2033. It must occur before it. The prerequisite conditions and their current status. Before Gog-Magog can occur, several conditions must be met. Ezekiel's description implies them, and the current geopolitical record documents their status with precision. The first prerequisite is Iranian military capability. Ezekiel 38 verse 5 names Persia as a primary coalition member. Iran must be present, armed, and capable of participating in a major military operation against Israel. The current status: Iran has been the primary state sponsor of the anti-Israel military infrastructure in the region for 4 decades, funding and arming Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, and various militia groups in Iraq and Syria. As of early 2026, the military campaign against Iranian proxies in the region is actively degrading that infrastructure. But Iran itself retains its nuclear program, its ballistic missile capability, and its Revolutionary Guard Corps structure. A Gog-Magog coalition involving Iran is more plausible in the current environment than at any point in modern history, because Iranian regional ambitions and Israeli existential interests are in direct and documented conflict. The second prerequisite is Russian regional positioning. Ezekiel identifies Gog from the land of Magog as the leader of the coalition. Russia must have sufficient regional presence, political motivation, and military capability to lead an operation of this scale against Israel. The current status: Russian forces have been deployed in Syria since 2015, establishing air bases, port access at Tartus, and intelligence infrastructure across the northern Middle East. The Russia-Iran partnership documented earlier in this video gives Russia existing operational relationships with the primary regional coalition member. Russia's motivation, documented in statements from Russian officials and in Russian military doctrine, includes opposition to American and Israeli influence in the Middle East and the maintenance of Russian strategic positioning in the region. The third prerequisite is the absence of a Western military commitment to intervene. Ezekiel describes the Western response as a diplomatic protest, rather than a military intervention. The current status, the weakening of NATO cohesion documented throughout 2024 and 2025, the America First foreign policy orientation that questions the commitment to defending allies who do not meet defense spending requirements, and the broader fracturing of the post-World War II Western alliance structure all point toward a political environment in which a Western military response to a Gog-Magog attack is less automatic than it would have been at the height of the Cold War alliance structure. The fourth prerequisite is Israeli sovereignty and stability sufficient for the conditions of Ezekiel 38 verses 8 through 12, dwelling safely in unwalled villages, prosperous enough to be worth attacking for spoil. The current status: Israel is a technologically sophisticated economy ranked among the top 20 in the world by GDP per capita, with significant natural gas reserves in the Mediterranean discovered and developed from 2010 onward, with an advanced military capability including the Iron Dome missile defense system and a nuclear deterrent whose existence is neither confirmed nor denied by the Israeli government. Israel is exactly the target Ezekiel describes: wealthy, capable, and perceived by its enemies as vulnerable to a sufficiently large and coordinated attack. All four prerequisites are met or approaching completion in the current window. The coalition is assembling, the conditions are present, the deadline is fixed, the window is open. The aftermath and the 70th week, what follows after Gog-Magog. Understanding what happens after Gog-Magog is as important as understanding the battle itself, because the aftermath creates the conditions that the true God Code framework identifies as necessary for the opening of the 70th week. Chapter 39 verses 21 and 22. And I will set my glory among the heathen, and all the heathen shall see my judgment that I have executed, and my hand that I have laid upon them. So the house of Israel shall know that I am the Lord their God from that day and forward. The nations see it. Israel knows it. The Gog-Magog battle is not simply a military event. It is a divine demonstration, a public, undeniable, geopolitically visible act of God intervening directly in history in a way that cannot be attributed to military strategy, alliance politics, or human agency. A coalition destroyed on the mountains of Israel by earthquake, pestilence, hailstones, fire, and brimstone, leaving 1/6 of its forces alive, is not an event that any intelligence agency or military analyst will be able to explain through ordinary means. This divine demonstration occurring in the window immediately before the 70th week opens creates the theological and geopolitical conditions for something that has been impossible for 2,000 years. The restoration of the temple sacrifice. The Daniel 9, verse 27 covenant that opens the 70th week requires a functioning sacrificial system. Daniel 8 requires the daily sacrifice to be in operation before the midpoint when it is stopped. The restoration of the sacrifice requires political access to the Temple Mount and a level of Israeli confidence and international recognition that has not existed since 70 AD. A direct and undeniable divine intervention on behalf of Israel, watched by every nation, attributed by the text explicitly to the God of Israel, resulting in the total destruction of a coalition that included the primary military powers of the Eurasian North, would produce exactly the geopolitical and theological conditions necessary for the sacrifice to be restored and the covenant to be confirmed. The nations have seen the judgment. Israel knows the Lord is their God. The way to the temple is open. Gog-Magog is therefore not just a battle. It is the geopolitical hinge point between the precursor window and the 70th week. It is the event that clears the final obstacle to the restoration of the sacrifice, which starts the 2,300-day count of Daniel 8, which leads to the confirmation of the covenant, which opens the 70th week, which runs to the second coming at Sukkot 2040. The sequence is not fragmented or coincidental. It is the prophetic program unfolding in the precise order the text describes, inside the only mathematical window in which it can occur. The conclusion. 26 centuries ago, a Jewish priest in Babylonian exile described a military coalition, the conditions under which it would attack, the nations it would involve, the divine response that would destroy it, and the 7-year aftermath that would follow. He named the nations. He specified the conditions. He gave a precise duration for the weapon disposal operation. The nations he named are the nations whose alliance is documented in public records today. The conditions he specified are the conditions that exist in Israel today. The duration he gave, 7 years of burning, creates a mathematical deadline that runs out in 2033. We are inside the window. The coalition of Russia, Iran, Turkey, Libya, and Sudan is assembled and documented. The geopolitical prerequisites are met or approaching completion. The mathematical deadline is fixed. The current window, right now between 2026 and 2033, is not the most likely window for Gog-Magog. It is the only window the mathematics allows. And this is the moment in the documentary where the question shifts from the geopolitical to the personal. Because the same text that describes the battle also describes its purpose, that the house of Israel shall know that the Lord is their God from that day forward, and that the nations shall see his judgment and know his glory. The battle is not the end of the story. It is the clearing of the ground for the final chapter, the 70th week, the second coming, and the millennium that follows. 1,000 years of the wolf lying down with the lamb, of swords beaten into plowshares, of the knowledge of the Lord covering the earth as the waters cover the sea, and then eternity. The True God Code framework documents that final chapter in detail across this channel and in the book this research has produced. The mathematics, the astronomy, the hostile witnesses, the parables, the 7 independent streams of evidence, all of it converges on the same conclusion that Ezekiel reached 26 centuries ago, from a different direction. This is the generation that will see these things. The question the text asks every reader is the same question it has been asking since Ezekiel wrote it down on a scroll in Babylon. Not when will this happen, not whether this will happen, but where will you be standing when it does? Thank you for watching True God Code. Please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.